How many people are not in tech? Coming. We'll get started in a few minutes. This is currently do the clap exercise. So just really quick, some housekeeping. We are live streaming this. There will be photos taken. So just from stepping through this door, all of you have agreed to our photo and video release. We're not going to steal your identities. Your face might show up in a video for a split second if you're lucky. Also, the bathrooms are all the way in the back on the right. So go past the robot. There's a beautiful drawing of a toilet over there with a sign, toilets are over there. Before we begin, I also want to give a shout out to Justa. Back there is Oleg and Kentaro. If you are not on Justa yet, please get on there. They are a job platform for startups in Japan. Very, very relevant to today, and we're very lucky to have them sponsor tonight. Without further ado, I guess we can get started. We have this lovely panel and me, and I will let them get started with introducing themselves. I guess we'll start with Jordan.
Sure. Hello, everyone. All right, good evening. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Ian, for hosting this, and for Justin for sponsoring this wonderful event. My name is Jordan Fisher. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a tech startup in Japan called Zehitomo. So we are a marketplace for local services. We empower freelancers, small businesses, ranging from plumbers to photographers to personal trainers, to grow while making it as easy as possible for consumers to match with exactly what they're looking for. So we've been around for a few years now. We've gone through a couple rounds of fundraising, so I can talk about that. And I joined as a new grad, an engineer. I'm a computer science background as well. I joined as a new grad in JP Morgan Tokyo on the fixed income side, doing a handful of different things, building out global projects, and then more of a quant role in rates desk before moving over to sales trading. So I did run the tech recruiting pipeline there for about 5 years too. I rebuilt it up after the leadership talk, so I can kind of talk about that and contrast it to what it's like hiring at a startup, and there are definitely some differences.
Also, thanks for inviting me on. My name is Gerpheide, and I am the VP of Engineering at a startup in Tokyo called Bespoke. We make a chatbot for tourism. So the idea is that tourists can use our chatbot and ask questions about where they should go to get sushi or the checkout time of their hotel, things like that. So we sell our chatbot to places that have a lot of tourists, and those places, like a hotel, are the ones who would pay us for a customized version of this chatbot. Our biggest client right now is Narita, so if you go to Narita and connect to the Wi-Fi, you should get redirected to our chatbot, and you can ask it questions about your flight and food and whatever in different terminals. And we are just under 20 engineers now, and we do pretty much everything in-house. So since I've been at Bespoke, we have hired data scientists and machine learning engineers to front-end and back-end to technical product managers. So I can talk about any of those things. And then prior to working at Bespoke, I was an engineering manager at AWS in the Netherlands. Even though I'm originally from the US, but for the last 8 years I was in the Netherlands. And I came to Japan in December.
Hi. All right. We got an excited crowd here. All right, my name is Mike Omoto. I'm an engineering manager for a company called Mercari. Mercari is a marketplace app. You can sell things to other people who are willing to pay however much or little money, often not so much money, for the kind of things that you don't need. So if you have a closet that is in need of cleaning, Mercari is a great place to go clean it up. I am an engineering manager there. And Mercari is not, I guess, it's pretty young, only about 6 years old, but it does not really, size-wise, it does not really fall into the category of startups, most people would say. It's got about, I'm gonna say like, almost 2,000 people in it, so it's quite a large company at this point. Like this morning, I was working with internal controls, which is a pair of buzzwords that most startups don't actually have anything to do with. So, to that end, what do I know about getting hired for a startup? So, first and foremost, I spent a whole bunch of time running onboarding, and I've done a whole bunch of time doing hiring at Mercari proper, which I've been for about the last year or so. But before then, I was actually the director of engineering for a company called Presto. Now, I joined Presto about 7 years ago, where there was only 4 engineers on it. And while I was there, I grew the team, I helped grow the team for about 3 years, then personally grew the team for another 3 years, till about a team of hiring 30 people or so over that time period, and at the same time also doing interviews for, I don't know, I want to say like many hundreds of interviews and rewriting the entire like hiring process there. On top of that, I also spent a whole bunch of time with coding boot camps in the Bay, where I helped a whole bunch of people get jobs. I would do whiteboard interviews and do mentorship for individual like graduates, I think they're called, right? To go out into the world and sort of find programming jobs. Some of them are now making more money than I am. That's cool. So hopefully I have a little bit to contribute to this conversation. But yeah, it's nice to meet you all. You guys are
Hi, so my name is Yan, co-founder of Chrysalis. We are a coding school in Japan. We are not a typical coding school. We don't take beginners into our full-time immersive course. We believe that if you really want to learn how to code, if you want to make this commitment, we want to see that from you. There's a lot of free materials online, and you should be able to learn enough on your own to be able to get into our course. So we're most well known for a 3-month full-time intensive, and our graduates make significantly more than the market average in Japan. They work at companies like Zehitomo. We've got 3 graduates there. We've got people everywhere from Google to Sony, and then to small little companies like Pady and Zehitomo. Not that small anymore though.
Not that big yet.
Yeah. CurveGrid is another one. They're a blockchain company. So a lot of really cool companies. And so I've got a lot of experience with helping our students get these jobs at companies in Japan and outside of Japan. About more than half of our students for the full-time course are non-Japanese. And oftentimes they don't speak Japanese and they need visa sponsorship. That's a profile that we see quite often. So we're pretty familiar with finding these people jobs. So far we've had a really high success rate. So I can talk more about that. Previously, I started my career out in finance. I was doing commodities trading, really didn't like it, and so I ended up switching careers into tech. I decided I wanted to become a software engineer because I didn't know how to make a tech product, but all of the ideas that I had were app ideas. So I thought I should probably learn how to make this first before I try to start a company. And so before Chrysalis, I was working as a software engineer in Silicon Valley at a startup. It was my first startup experience. And then around that time, I also started another coding school in the Middle East focusing on refugees. With that said, I have a nice little slide here that has our different talking points. I know it's a little bit difficult for people in the back to see this, but I'll just quickly read through what some of these are. For Jordan, transitioning from big non-tech company to small tech company. Hiring at large companies, starting a tech company, hiring in Japan, and scaling a tech company. For Chris, transitioning from a big tech company, in this case Amazon, to a very small startup, leading tech teams in large companies and small, diversity, streamlining a hiring process for a startup, hiring in Europe and hiring in Japan. For Mike, right next to me, transitioning from a Silicon Valley tech startup to big Japanese tech startup, leading tech teams, diversity, hiring in Japan, hiring in Silicon Valley, and making a non-tech to tech career transition, because Mike, you did not start out as a software engineer.
Yeah, I have a psych degree.
There you go. I have a degree in economics and Arabic.
Yeah. Psych does not pay.
These two have like the real degrees. And for me, transitioning from big non-tech company to a tech company, starting a tech company, hiring in Japan, hiring in Silicon Valley, making the non-tech to tech transition, and I forgot to add this on there, but also diversity stuff. Yes. So without further ado, we can get this started if anyone in the audience has any questions. Otherwise, I can start us off. But before we do that, anyone with a question? All right. Oh, all right. You can take this so that people can hear.
Yes, my name is Johannes, and I wonder what's the most important part you look at when hiring for a startup?
The most important what?
Point
I think it's always hard to make it be just one, but I'd say there's two very large segments that are always looked at. I think one, especially when you're talking about engineering, is the actual skill. The skill of what they, if, for example, we hire full stack JavaScript engineers, and so we're looking for a senior candidate, we're looking for someone who knows something about that, and we go through technical tests to evaluate on that side. But the other very large element is the cultural fit, and I think there's this whole idea of brilliant jerks, and do you tolerate them or not? I think many decide not to. As do we just realize that the cost of having to manage people in a different way is not really. It may be okay when you're like a few person company, but it makes things much harder to scale, and especially when it comes to engineering. I think everybody's the same, but I think engineers value this a lot more, are all the kind of intrinsic motivators as opposed to the extrinsic ones. And so obviously we can talk about salary and equity and things like that down the line, but I think that working with really great people is one of the greatest benefits in any company. And so we really want to make sure that people are able to get along well.
Yeah, and to add to that maybe, we typically look for two things. So again, it's skill and I guess what we call culture fit. And for skill at Amazon, we would have you do like the very typical write this recursive, whatever graph search algorithm. But here we kind of realize we don't do that every day. And so we look for some basic data structures, knowledge, just like when to use lists versus dictionaries or hash maps or something. And we do live coding. It's not because we think live coding is the best, but it is the most practical in terms of the time spent for both parties. So that's really the reason we do it. For culture fit, we've split that into a couple different traits. And like we just heard, we also do not really tolerate the skilled but kind of a dick people. So that's something really important to us. So we specifically look for things like modesty and autonomy, and we have sets of questions that are good at kind of pulling those things out. And there's like 5 different things that we've defined our culture as, and we consider those as those.
Sure, why not? I'm gonna flip this question around a little bit, and from like the point of view of the applicant, like how do you get skill is like probably pretty easy to, I mean, it's not easy, but it's like kind of obvious, right? Like practice, reading, like building stuff. How do you get culture fit? What does that really mean? And like, especially at like the small startup phase, like 10 people, right? Culture fit literally is more about, hey, do these people like me, than it is about like, oh, this person is like, I don't know, really modest, I don't know. But fundamentally, right, it's like, hey, these are people that as an engineer, as a human being, you're gonna be spending like all your time with, right? And there's like 9 of you, which means that there's like nowhere to hide for someone if there's someone who's a little bit of a jerk, or which is the reason why like this jerk thing is super important. So A, don't be a jerk. But the other is just like, hey, are these the kinds of people that I personally get along with? And that is, to a large degree, really about luck to some parts, right? And the thing about so small startups is that because it's such a crapshoot, right, you have to like go chasing after a whole bunch of the opportunities to like see, it's like, oh man, I really feel like I belong here, but the payoff for that is really big because you end up with this group of people that you're like, oh my god, we're super excited about doing this, and that's sort of what you want. So even if like you've chased after a few of these opportunities, you're like, I don't know if this is really great yet. Think of it like dating, right? You're sort of like in this for the long run, and so the second you find someone who's like, oh man, I really want to, I was going to use the phrase get into bed, but I realize that's not. But when this is the person that I really want to like hang out with all the time and sort of like make my best buddy and like go the long haul with, that's like the moment where it clicks for a lot of people. And that's what makes like being in a small startup fun. That's where you get like the intrinsic motivation that Jordan was talking about. And that's what's going to make it worthwhile, especially for yourself in the long term or even the short term, because that's where your own motivation is going to come from. You're going to learn the most in that particular environment.
Cool. I guess, so just to summarize, so a lot of people are talking about culture fit and then also like skill set, right? I tend to look at this as like global skills and then domain specific skills. And for me, especially with a small startup, these domain specific skills are always second priority at a startup. It's the universal skills, the global skills that are far more important. And that was one of the first big lessons that I learned. We had hired someone who was a super senior engineer and shelled out a lot for him, made a bunch of concessions, and in the end, there were so many global skills that he lacked. I mean, I wouldn't call him a jerk, but there were certain things that he just didn't jive with us as a startup. As a startup, we can't give you a task, a list on Jira or like a thing on, you know, on Trello for you to do. Like, part of your job is to figure out how you can help us and where you fit in. And so there's not really a space for a super senior engineer who's just like, give me these requirements and these specifications so I can do it, right? Because I think he really struggled to perform when the details were vague. But the issue is that at a startup, the details are always a little vague because we're all trying to figure it out. And so if you shut down and you can't function when someone gives you vague details, if you don't have the hustle to figure out what is necessary, you're not going to do well in a small startup. You're better off at a large company where you've got manager keeping track of what's going on for you. So that's what I learned. Yeah. Anyone want to add anything before we move on to another question? Cool. Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Do I get a mic?
Yes.
There you go. Hi, my name is Paulo. Maybe connecting to Jan's story, I would like to know also from the others, a bit personal. What was your worst hire? Your worst hire, why was it the worst hire? What did you learn from that, and what did you change in your internal processes after this experience?
Should I start with you, Chris?
Okay.
Wow.
Okay. I won't name a single one, but through the years I've managed out a couple of people, and I can talk about the types of people maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not looking for names.
And I'll reflect at the end about which one was the most difficult for me. Maybe that's the real answer to your question. But I think the people that I've worked with for what we say low performance, and eventually asked them to leave the company, have been in two buckets. One of them is because they just don't get along well with people, and we can make that way more specific. So I really don't like using the word culture fit. Personally, I feel like it's a cop-out, and if you try,
I say culture ed.
culture ed. Well, I mean, but if you try, you can usually identify, I think, more specific characteristics.
Yeah.
This is something we did at Amazon a lot, and something that I thought worked well, and I've taken the things I like for the most part from Amazon. So those are people who they just don't know how to phrase things in a way that doesn't sound mean to people or condescending. That's a really big one. People very easily sound condescending when they know a lot of stuff. Similar culture fit issues when people, there's a natural phase that a lot of engineers go through, and it's right when you have enough knowledge to notice what others are doing wrong, then you just talk about that all the time. About like, oh, well, this was made in this way and I should be in 2 classes, or like, this was made in this way and it should be parallel, and this is bad function naming and whatever. But you go through a phase where you do that, and if you can't get past that phase, which is the phase where you realize no one is going to fix that for you, what the company needs is the people who recognize those things and fix them. If you can't get past that, that's another one that eventually it's just not productive to talk about what's wrong, because it turns out other people, for the most part, also see what's wrong, but know what is worth addressing and what's not. Where the culture fit ones. I think those are the ones I think of for the culture fit side. On the other side, sometimes people just aren't very productive. And they're super nice to work with, but sometimes they just have trouble dealing with questions that aren't completely laid out for them step by step, or just, I don't know, maybe they get distracted very easily throughout the day, and those are too bad, but that's the other type I think that I've had to manage out over the years. In general, they're both hard to deal with. The first type is harder because you get more arguments when you're talking about their performance, because they know they're good at what they're doing, but you have to say, no, but these other things matter. So that, I feel like, is more emotionally intense during these sessions, and those types of feelings. But for the other type, you just feel bad because you really like that person usually. So I think they're both too bad, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's a great question. I've asked this to more people actually, but I think there's a couple major types that we've seen as well, and I think it goes back to the previous question of at the very beginning, your first few members that you're hiring is more like dating. You're trying to find people that you can get along with, and everybody's you're hiring more for generalists early on and more kind of specialists later on, right? And so once you have maybe Jan, in the case of your hire, once you're a much larger organization, you need someone who's world class at something very specific, then you can hire for that, and that's a better fit. But at the very beginning, you need people who are able to wear multiple hats. And I think you generally, the first however many dozens of people that join, kind of consider them your cultural co-founders in a way, right? And so the culture is kind of created mostly by the founders, but then by the members that join. And so it is really important having those right members there. That said, at the very beginning, because you are hiring more generalists as opposed to specialists, and because lots of the time you don't have many options. If you're a startup, I can't pay a recruiter, right? I can't, I don't have the same type of reach. I need to sell my vision. And so generally the people that join an early stage company have strong alignment on the vision. But maybe they don't have as many skills, and we're all trying to figure out what kind of roles need to be built out of this. And so as the company scales and you need people that have higher skill levels in different areas, this is where I think you have the case where you have somebody who's maybe you get along with very well, but doesn't have the right skill set for that stage of the company and isn't able to grow with the company or had more general skills overall. And so I think that's one case that happens. I mean, most people do not grow with every single stage of the organization. The other case is that, and we try to capture this by, we do, most companies do a 3-month probation period and stuff like that, but, people also have their honeymoon period, or the first few months, maybe they work really, really hard and they're really excited. On top of that, I would say generally people who work in startups, like probably most people in this room or up here, are all kind of crazy to a certain extent, right? We have our own eccentricities, right? We're all our kind of different cult. And I mean that in a good way, right? If any rational person would conform to the world, not try to change it. And hence, we're all very irrational people in startups. And I think you don't have to be the brilliant jerk to not fit in as well, right? You can have people who really kind of see eye to eye, share the same vision, but then ultimately you realize that there are other cultural kind of elements or different kind of core competencies that don't scale well with the company, you don't think reflects the company. And given how important everybody is as a cultural co-founder in the early days, that can really have knock-on effects to other employees. So I'm speaking in generalities right now. I can give you more details later, but I've seen this pattern a few times where hire people that have what seem like the right type of crazy, and it turns out to be the wrong type of crazy. After a honeymoon period of however many months, and there it's more about the impact to the rest of the organization, how we're going to scale and rally behind that person, and what's best for that person to be able to perform or not. And what we did after that, to address the other part of your question, is we actually really brainstormed across the entire company, and we had different culture events and stuff. We'd get together on Friday, and we did some kind of team building exercise and activities. And we tried to think, what types of things do we value, do we care about as a culture? And we built out our kind of core competencies, which end up being kind of problem solving, teamwork, and ownership. Right? Those are the 3 things that we look at when we're trying to evaluate somebody other than their actual hard skills. And we use that when we look into our quarterly reviews and everything else afterwards. But we never really noticed that, to us, this kind of respect and kind of building that into teamwork was a very important element until we actually spoke with our other cultural co-founders and really tried to have everybody walk to that process. And so once there's buy-in, then we find that it's easier for everybody to do a similarly good job of evaluating other people, either when looking to hire and onboard, but also as we do communication throughout the company from ongoing performance reviews, et cetera.
Mike, you have any stories? Stories from the trenches,
I
the digital trenches.
So that was a remarkably thorough answer. So I'll answer in a more entertaining, like a straight up. Yeah. So true story. Worst hire we ever had may have found their way into our founder's bedroom with a knife, and after stealing their wallet, and ran off on a meth-induced rampage. So that sucked. But great answer.
Is that a real true story?
It's a true story. I'm not even. Yeah.
It's a much better answer.
No, it's.
What were the early signs?
Is it, can you post-mortem on this? Like, what was the...
Is this appropriate?
It is not even relevant, really. But it was.
Hashtag San Francisco. Do we have any questions from the audience with regards to hiring in Japan, getting a job at a startup, anything related to that? Otherwise, I've got to, oh, okay, all right, I'll just keep my question to myself then.
Hi, my name is Leo, and I'm still a student currently studying computer science. So my question is, it's a bit similar to the first question, but what is the most important elements or skills in student internship who doesn't necessarily have enough technical skills that startup companies are looking for? Or like, how can I set myself apart from the rest of the student applicants when it comes to startup companies?
I want to start with you, Mike,
Sure.
since I know that this is something that you do.
All right. So a little bit of background. I run. Well, up until last quarter, I ran onboarding for all internships, all mid-career hires, and all new grads at Mercari. So in the last 8 months or so, I've onboarded, I would say, like about 150 total software engineers, maybe 200. I don't keep track of the number. Anyway, so for what it's worth, like, I think that the best skill that you can gain is just like hunger to learn. Basically, like, you need to, I don't know, walking into the interview itself and saying, hey, like, I'm not just interested in one thing, but like, I can go the extra distance, right, to learn about the things that you want me to learn. Because the understanding for pretty much any company is that, like, you are just getting started, fundamentally. And it's not the year one number that companies are going to be looking at, because by year one, someone who's like really truly hungry and someone who's like kind of sort of hungry, right, is not going to be that big a difference. But like 3 years down the line, a person who's truly hungry will completely eclipse someone who is just sort of like trying to get by.
Yeah, I would add on that. I think hungry is a great way to describe it. I usually say attitude. So I think that at the very beginning you don't have the skills, but you can bring everything else to the table, and there's no reason for you not to. So when you're looking to bring on an intern, right, from the company's perspective, they're thinking, what's going to be the management cost of teaching this person how to do things and managing them and taking care of them on a day-to-day basis versus the output that they provide. And the output is probably going to be relatively low to anybody else in the organization if you don't have the same types of skills. But if you have the right attitude and you're proactive and you're attentive and you notice things and you go out of your way to do things that are great, there's no limit to the number of ways that you can help out within the organization. And so I think that, generally companies are hiring interns because they're considering bringing them on for full-time hires later, right? And so it's a kind of two-way evaluation period, and I think it's a great way to get to know a company, and so I would highly recommend doing it and doing maybe each summer or somewhere else if you want. But yeah, just have a great attitude. Don't complain about the things that you're asked to do unless you're being harassed. And then talk to HR. But assuming you have like rational people that you're working with, just go out of your way, be hungry, ask for more things to do, notice things that you can proactively do yourself. If someone says, oh, there's nothing else to do, network within the organization, pick up coffee for people, right? Just like make yourself useful in any way that you can. And you'll be able, as you do an amazing job of doing the very easy things, people will start to trust you and rely on you to do slightly bigger and bigger things as you go.
Can I add something else real quick? Who's ever heard of Waterloo, the school?
Waterloo is incredible.
Yeah, so Waterloo, so Waterloo is a university in Canada, and they give out, I think it's like, I don't know, they make their computer science graduates, and I think their general engineering graduates do like, what is it, 3 co-ops? 3, 4?
It's almost a year.
It's more than that. It's like, I think it's 2 full years of co-ops with like, I don't know, I've hired probably 3 or 4 people out of Waterloo, and they are consistently the best graduates I have. Like,
A co-op is an internship. That's Canadian for internship. So what's amazing about the University of Waterloo is because they make their students do these long internships, they basically are, they will go to some company like Apple, for instance, and they'll basically work there for almost a year, go back to school, finish their degree, and the best ones essentially go back to Apple as senior software engineers, or company A, company X. And that's incredible that they get that experience already. So by the time you graduate, you're already a senior software engineer, senior product manager, or whatever at a great company in the Valley.
yes, that. Thanks, yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Just to go down the line, I guess we can start from Jordan. Can you quickly give people kind of a recap of the hiring process at your company and what that looks like?
Sure. So we have many different channels in which we meet people. We don't go through paid recruiters right now because we're an early startup and we try to use our funds in other ways. So anybody here that's looking for a job later, they're a senior JavaScript engineer, product manager, UX directors, etc., come talk to me directly, or email us at recruiting@zehitomo.com. But we take on, so we have inbound and kind of outbound efforts that are around this, and we've met many people through Code Chrysalis, through other events that we do, and many through referrals as well. In terms of the actual interview process, after we kind of get an introduction, we go through, so our CTO Robert generally does a first interview to kind of get a really good fit for are they going to be a good fit in terms of what needs to happen within our organization? I'm going to take that a step back. We do screen the resume, given at the beginning we were very hungry for anybody who would be a good fit. Now we are a little bit more selective in who we talk with. We're looking for more senior roles, and so we're looking for people that have been, not interns right at the moment, although we were in the past and we probably will again in the future. And so if it's a good fit for our job description, Robert generally has a quick online chat to make sure that for both parties, it's a good use of time to come into the office and spend more time together, and really to see where their goals are and what the company's goals are and if they're aligned. And I think that's important for any role anywhere in the world, is that you want to make sure that the employee and the company's goals and interests are aligned, and that's how you can continue to perform well and take on more. After that, we go through a few different kind of technical interviews, and so you come in for, it's like a couple hours or so, but you go through a few different technical interviews kind of back to back, and really just kind of go in deep and make sure that it's a great fit and from the technical perspective. And then lastly, maybe Robert or myself may have some kind of final interviews depending on which role it's for. If it's for a more senior role, right now we've just brought on an advisor from Silicon Valley. It's kind of co-founded unicorn-level companies. We'll be announcing it sometime soon. We may have that person interview. But it's really, after you get through the technical test and we know that it's a good fit in terms of skill, and we get very raw feedback very quickly right after that, then it's more of a two-way interview process. Really just to make sure that we can kind of get to know each other better and that you know what you're signing up for. And that we also kind of really know and understand your intentions. So we try to make it as fast as possible because, speed is everything when it comes to startups. And so,
Okay, this is a topic I put a lot of effort into since I started at this company because we didn't have a very formal interview process before. It was very much just having an engineer sitting down and just chatting about Ruby or something, but that wasn't super effective. And it took forever until the last stages, since we'd also do things like coding assignments and review it, have them present. And we've changed it a lot. So if anyone wants to hear about the pitfalls of the other ways that we noticed, I can talk about that later. But now what the process is we primarily use recruiters for practical reasons, because we're a small company and not everyone knows about us. Then we do some kind of resume screening, and then once we decide to go forward with someone, we send them a very short questionnaire. This questionnaire asks a couple of questions like, what's the most challenging project you've worked on? Of these roles, front end, back end, machine learning, people manager, some other ones, which ones do you find not interesting, want this to be my job? So we can get an idea of how broad the people want to work or don't want to work. And all of those for the most part are fine, but they really help us during the interview process to understand what kind of things they might be happy doing and not. Then after that, we pretty much never say no to someone at that stage. That's just to help us go to the phone screen. So during the phone screen, we use their resume and this questionnaire to come up with questions that are about half questions around your personality things, again, around modesty and that you're data-driven and autonomous and those things, and then about half technical questions where we about half technical questions where we don't do live coding during the phone screen, but we will ask you, like, okay, if you were given this coding problem, more or less, how would you solve it, and just see how your reasoning process goes. So that's we aim for a 45 to 60 minute phone screen, and then if that is successful, we invite you back for an on-site, and that is 2 hours long. It's split into 2 interviews and questions at the end. So the first interview, again, is more personality questions. Second interview is live coding. We ask people to bring their laptops. And then we try to have something like 15 minutes at the end where you can just ask whatever questions you want to us about the role. Hopefully that's the time where we could also sell you on the company a little bit more if you're not sold yet. And then if that is successful, the very last thing is you meet the CEO. So for the most part, I act as the hiring manager for the whole engineering team, but the CEO would still like to meet the people who would join the company. And so that's a quick, something like 15 to 30 minute call with her. She says whether she feels like she'd get along with that person or not. It's very fuzzy, I think. But so far we haven't rejected anyone just because of that stage, but I think it's important that she will also end up interacting with these people sometimes. And that's our whole process. The whole thing, we try to get back to you always within 3 days or so in between those, so maybe it's a couple weeks, depending on your schedule and ours, I guess, but something like that.
Cool. All right. So there's kind of 2 possible experiences here that I can sort of talk about. First is the hiring experience at Mercari, which is sort of big Japan tech, and that's pretty straightforward. And the other experience that I can talk about is my experience at Presto, which is a startup in Silicon Valley proper. So just quick show of hands, who wants to hear about Mercari? And who wants to hear about Presto? Cool, all right, so I'll talk about Mercari. I mean, it's a long way away, so, And honestly, it actually sounds a lot like Jordan's anyway, so I don't blame anybody. But I should, because I didn't know that before. All right, so Mercari is very big. There is a lot of hiring going on. Our inbounds, we use literally everything under the sun, from events like this. If you feel like coming over and talking to me after the event, by all means, I will give you a recruiter. On the other hand, for what it's worth, I think Mercari is really good at sort of putting its face out there, right? Not necessarily me per se, but they have an entire sort of outreaching hiring team, and so people are generally finding their inbounds either A, by knowing someone that they've met at some event, B, straight up cold calling a recruiter, or C, finding out through some platform in Japan like Wantedly or LinkedIn. Now, we do sort of different team-based hiring. So we have one major recruiting team that sort of handles everything around recruiting, hiring, onboarding, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But this team, the surface of this team is basically across the entire company, right? So we have 3 major engineering groups. We have the US team, we have the JP team, and we have a Mercari team. And each of these teams has sort of their own unique needs. For example, if you want to work in Mercari, you need to have some semblance of financial knowledge and that sort of thing. And if you want to work in JP backend, you need to know sort of PHP and Go. And if you want to work in the United States, you need to know more PHP and less Go, unfortunately. But there's like each of these needs is sort of figured out by the hiring team proper. And so when you make a request, like when your resume hits that team, part of their initial job is to actually figure out like where your fit, like initial fit, is going to be based on the skills that you have. So the other nice thing about being sort of a big tech startup is that we have enough inbounds actually where we don't have to like worry so much about rejection. So the rejection rate at even the resume stage is relatively high. If you get rejected at that stage, call the recruiter, try again, be like, are you really sure? Get sticky. That's my best advice I can give you. But other than that, it's just kind of touch and go. Because even though that the person that's actually screening the resume, right, might be for one particular, let's say you're a backend engineer, might be for one particular group of the backend, but the requirements for some other backend somewhere else in the company, right, might actually be slightly different. So there might be, oh, you know what? Let me actually like ask around. Might be one of the answers. And so like the interesting thing about a company of this size, that like a no is almost like never like a hard get out of my face. It's like, hey, come back if you with more information, right? On top of that, the first technical screen will be usually immediately after that. We usually, I think these days, I think there's actually like a culture, quote unquote culture fit, I guess chat with someone from HR before jumping into the technical screen. But the technical screen is usually something along the lines of, again, this is different for like pretty much every single group out there, so it's hard to sort of generalize. But generally, it's usually some technical challenge like build me a thing. For example, in case of the Android group, it's like build me an Android app that does this, this, and this. And for the back end, it's like I have a class that needs to be plugged into the backend somewhere. It does this and this. Please make sure that that works that way. For like iOS, it's like using these, iOS components to make it do this, 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 right? So it's like kind of this comprehensive, practical sort of, it's not like, write me a completely brand new data structure that's never been invented before kind of thing. It's like usually a practical programming problem. Then you move on to sort of two separate on-sites that'll be held with typically a senior member and an engineering manager. The senior member will usually do something that's fairly technical. Will go in depth on an individual component of your resume. So maybe you're a backend engineer, so I see that you worked on like Redis. Can you tell me about these kinds of things, or what kind of architecture you built, or that kind of thing? That will be typically the second half of that interview. The first half is going to be, sorry, I'm remembering this from like 6 months ago, but the first half of the interview is typically going to be like more of a technical needs question, like have you ever been working with like Jira, or have you, how's your GitHub knowledge, or like on a scale of 1 to 10, rate your programming skills. Now that I heard hers, it'd be really smart to put that stuff on a questionnaire. I'll talk to HR in the morning. But anyway, so yeah, it's kind of like a technical dive into like the little elements of the things that you worked at. And what they're really doing here is not really like a pure technical test per se, but it's really like a bullshit detector, right? It's like, is this person, they say that they know JavaScript, but like, they can't. How do you log something in JavaScript? I asked that question and they weren't able to answer. That sounds weird, right? Like, it's this sort of like, hey, someone's laughing, maybe this actually happened. But yeah, it's kind of like this, hey, where does this person say they are, and what kind of things do they think they know, and how do they sound like? It's a kind of feely thing. There's an actual like checklist of things, but here's the kind of secret about Mercari, is that checklist is just so long that actually doing all those sort of things will result in a really, really boring interview. So most of the interviewers slightly wing it and like omit parts of it so that they get sort of more resolution on you more holistically for that particular team that they're interviewing for. Now, the last one will usually be an engineering manager. The engineering manager will do definitely like more cultural things. Like typically the hardest technical question will be given by the senior engineer prior. The engineering manager will definitely be more about like more general culture fits, like hey, let's say on a team, maybe you've gotten like a bad code review and someone, you're like really reaching out for that, like what kind of things do you tend to write, or like what has your experience been overall with engineering teams, or like what kind of person are you on an engineering team, or like what are your own coding philosophies? And so these are all like, I don't know, sort of generalized, like what kind of engineer are you questions. And so the reality is, I think that this, like, it's relatively unstructured actually, even for a big company, which means that the hit rate for any given team is also very, very different. And so the individual teams themselves, some of them have more process than others, and you sort of have to get lucky to find one that might have the requirements that are more well-defined, and others might just be like, hey, we're in a rush to hire, and so you're trying to pick up as many people as possible, and I didn't say that in public, even though this is being live streamed recorded. Cool.
All right, so as Code Chrysalis, a lot of companies like to work with us and hire from us because essentially we pre-screen people for them. So to get into our 3-month program, you need to pass a coding challenge to apply, and then it's a series of technical interviews. So depending on your level and where you're at, it could be one interview, or in some cases it could be multiple. And basically we want to see the effort that people put into it. So, if they fall short technically, we give them feedback, we give them homework, and have them try again. A really important thing is, we also assess for how well they might fit into the course personality-wise. So in the interview, we always ask something that's a little out of someone's knowledge zone. So it's, kind of related to what they know, but we know it's like a bit of a reach. Like we know we can gauge their level and ask them something a little bit harder because we want to see how they respond to it. So are they the type to freak out and freeze and not be able to do anything? Or do they think through it? You're allowed to use Google in the interview. So you're allowed to Google stuff if you want. We want to see what is the process that people take to solve a coding challenge, and how do they react to it. So is it making a bunch of print statements? Is it Googling a bunch of things? That is what we want to see, because they could be we want to see that effort. We want to see a good personality. We want to see someone facing a challenge positively. Because you could be the strongest software engineer, but if you're negative, if you are constantly down, if you're getting angry really easily, if you're not fun to be around, we're not going to be able to get you hired no matter how much you learn from our course. And that's something that we're really adamant and strict on. So yeah, for us, communication, personality, that's the top. Everything is secondary. If we see a lot of effort coming from someone, we will work with them to help them get to a level to enter our course technically. The technical stuff, that can always be taught. All right, are there any other questions from the audience?
Actually,
Yeah.
one thing. I want to second the bullshit detector and this technique, because it's very effective to just drill down on someone's project. And it's not just for bullshit detection, though it's very effective at that. But the other thing is just to know that you can trust that person when they say something is the way it is. So this is probably one of the major things that I look for when I do interviews, is just pick one of the projects they say they worked on and say like, okay, you said you did API design, tell me about that, and then pick one thing they take from that and say, okay, well, why'd you use, I don't know, post here versus get or something, and then keep going, like, okay, what server did you use on the back end, or why this tooling, or why this database, if you say you designed the system. And it's not that you have to know the answers to those, but if you say, oh, the reason was memory consumption, then I'm going to say, okay, well, tell me about the errors you were seeing for memory consumption and what tooling you were used to analyze them. And it's really only to see if when you say something is true, if it's true. And it goes a little bit along with the modesty aspect that we also look for, is you should say you don't know when you don't know, and we value that. Because some of the harder people to work with, especially as a manager, are the ones that you're not sure if when they say, oh no, it works like this, or oh no, I will do it by tomorrow, and you're not sure if that's right. That's one of the hardest things for a manager to work with, so I especially care about this. And drilling down on their project is super effective at that. So if you put a project on your resume, just try to know which design decisions you made and the reasons for those, and know when to say you don't know for the other ones.
I'm going to do a few quick fire rounds, so if we could keep the answers short, I want to hear your opinions for them. So the first one is going to be number of years on a job description. Something to ignore or something to pay attention to? Thoughts?
As an applicant, if
Yeah.
you should pay attention to that, if you say
Yes.
okay.
Sorry, the number of years that the person applying has.
No, the number of years on the job description. Like we want 3 to 5
Oh,
years.
oh. No, I mean we don't. I don't think we put that. Maybe we do.
Yeah, who does that anymore?
I think it just is meant to give an idea of someone who has worked this number of years may have this level of kind of knowledge, but the knowledge and the ability to do the job is much more important than the actual years.
Alright, so it sounds like it's bullshit. Don't pay attention to it. Alright, what about...
Know thyself, I think.
Huh?
Know yourself.
Know yourself. That's very deep.
Alright, and what women only apply when they meet 100% of the requirements that are listed, but men statistically apply when they meet 6 out of 10 requirements that are listed there. So especially the women in the audience, please ignore 4 out of 10.
How about emailing back after the interview? Like a thank you email back after an interview. Yes or no?
I have no preference, but others do. I've read.
It's nice, but not necessary.
Yeah, nice to have. If you said you were going to follow up with something, they'll follow up with it.
How about when you ask a candidate if they have any questions and they say no?
I personally don't mind.
I just assume that they're going to come out later because, yeah.
Yeah, I personally don't mind.
All right, cover letter with a resume.
I haven't seen one in a long time.
People still use resumes, or there's like LinkedIn and GitHub.
Well, like adding a message to it.
Yeah.
I've had some really poorly written cover letters, so those will go against it. So if you're gonna do one, do it well.
Yeah.
Actually, because Justa is here, I think when we were filtering on people from Justa, that was one of the biggest things, is if they write like something that sounded really personal on Justa, then we would look at their resume and otherwise not.
All right. Okay, we've got a few more minutes left, so are there any other questions from the audience?
I was going to add that one point to the last one, actually. I realized that when it comes to cover letters, it's very different for a large company and for a startup. And for a startup, nobody joins a startup unless you actually have close affinity to the vision. Otherwise, it doesn't generally make sense. So if you're going to write something, I think writing about why you are interested in what that startup is doing is probably the most important thing. Whereas for a large company, it's more of like your background and stuff.
Hi, I'm Marvin, and I would like to ask, especially Jordan, because like you said something about being specialist and being a generalist, and how long do you think that we need, like a software engineer need to work before quitting his generalist job and try to go more into the specialist area?
So I think what I meant by generalist and specialist is that as a company matures, you need people who can wear multiple hats for somebody who wants to like be better than everybody else at something core. And I think when it comes to engineering, there's generally 2 large paths as the company matures. And so there is the specialist path, and maybe you want to become, a front-end engineer or back-end engineer, or something very specific, and be better than anybody else in Japan at it. But as the company grows, you can also take more of the becoming a bit more of a product manager. And so I think that generalist within an engineering organization becomes more of a PM role. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The bad thing is when you're not able to grow with the organization, and you're not able to basically be adding value and yeah. So there are ways to do it as a generalist engineer, but yeah, you have to. That your role changes, and you're probably less likely to be actually just a developer.
Can I just add something? And what if you feel that the company that you are in does not grow, and you are not growing?
I'd say my recommendation for anybody in any company is that, yeah, you got to stay challenged to be motivated, right? And it's going to be best for you, and it's going to be best for the company when you're in an environment where you have the right level of challenge, right? And maybe sometimes the challenge is completely overwhelming and you aren't able to perform at all, and it's just stressful. And sometimes it's not challenging enough, and you're just going to feel kind of bored and take on other hobbies. And so coasting can maybe feel fun for like a month or 2, but it's not a great way to live life, right? There's so many things that we can all do. especially as engineers, there's limitless kind of opportunities out there. And so I would really just make sure, and that's one of the reasons it's important to have strong alignment between what you want to do and what the company wants to do, is to make sure that you can continue to challenge yourself and take on new challenges in the same direction. If you wanted to, like, you're really interested in challenging yourself with something to do with VR, and you're joining a company that has nothing to do with VR, then you may realize, okay, there's some ways you can challenge yourself, but if it's not the same direction that you want to grow, it's hard. But yeah, if anyone right now is not motivated or challenged and can't find that in your environment, please quit and join a startup. Thank you.
Or let your manager know. I mean, sometimes
Yeah,
they
let
just
them
don't
know.
realize that you don't enjoy what you're doing.
All right, let's do one more question. All right, right in the front.
Right.
Thanks. Hello guys, how are you?
Yo.
Hello, my name is Axel, nice to meet you. And I am not a tech guy, so I know nothing about tech. No coding, nothing at all. I am a marketing guy, so I specialize in creative work, like content creation and all that stuff. So for someone who has no background regarding tech, but has a lot of knowledge regarding marketing, like what would you recommend for someone who's not a tech guy to apply to startups?
I mean, what do you want to do? Do you want to be a software engineer or?
No. Like work with stuff with marketing
Sure.
in a startup, like a tech
We
startup.
have to expand our.
Yeah. I would say so.
A little bit.
Yeah, so I look after the entire company, so we hire, outside of engineering, we hire sales, we hire marketing, we hire a number of functions, and so yeah, apply as a marketer. Startups need marketing as well, and I think that the most important thing there is just, the same idea that you're going to wear multiple hats, and so marketing is a very broad term, right? You cover everything, maybe from kind of digital ads to offline marketing to other different forms of growth hacking to scraping, etc. And so I'd say in Japan, do you speak Japanese as well?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so in Japan there's a lot of foreigners I've met that kind of want to do a marketing role, and there it's much harder. If you speak Japanese, given that majority of marketing work in Japan is marketing to the majority of the population, which is Japanese, then yeah, every startup we're hiring for marketers. Maybe not every startup is always hiring for marketing, but that's what I would just filter for, and I would just, but have the right open mind and this kind of growth mindset that we talk about in startups in terms of not saying, okay, this is all I can do, hence this is all I will do, and kind of putting a box around it, but saying, this is where my strengths are, this is where my interests are, how does that line up with what you're looking for, and having that very honest conversation.
Got it. Perfect.
Yeah, so there's actually, at my previous startup, there was sort of a guy kind of like you. Like, he really enjoyed sort of like the strong marketing aspect of it, but wasn't really satisfied with just the marketing. He sort of like branched out in other things, like did a little business development, did a little sales, did a little this, did a little that. This person in particular went on to do like, analytics and things like that, and like eventually became a data scientist. But for what it's worth, like being able to leverage, right, what you know about one like specialist, I don't know, what's the expression of T-shaped person, are you familiar with this? Like a T-shaped person having like your strengths and having your base being both a generalist and a specialist all in one package, right? Is a great place to land if you want to become sort of a marketing person at a startup, because they're gonna need like not just, hey, this person's a marketer, but this marketing person can work effectively with a dev team, or this marketing person can work effectively with the analytics team, or this marketing person can work effectively with like, I don't know, sales or biz dev, right? And so like being able to hedge your bets against different parts of the company becomes really, really important.
Gotcha. Awesome.
Yeah, so I want to make sure that everyone here has time to mingle afterwards, and if you have particular questions for each of these people, that you have time to talk to them. So before we wrap up, let's go through last thoughts. Anything that you all want to add before we end?
Sure. Well, thank you everyone for the questions. We'll stick around for a bit as well if anyone has some really tough questions they're holding out on. I think it's never been a better time in Japan than right now to join a startup. I think the ecosystem is really still in its infancy, and it's nowhere near the levels that you see in Silicon Valley or some other countries out there. But there's more and more funding, there's more and more good ideas coming out, there's more and more people who are interested in the scene. And you're starting to have more and more success cases. So I think it's really a lot of parallels that I felt when I was in California 10, 15 years ago. not in terms of the actual scale of the program, but the directionality and the momentum around it. So I think it's great that everybody that's out here tonight is clearly, to some extent, interested in getting hired to a startup, hopefully. This is what the event was about. Yeah, I think there's never been a better time for it. So Zehitomo, if you're interested in joining a startup that may be Zehitomo, please come talk to me. We are hiring pretty much across the board, more for senior candidates at the moment, because we are going to be building out our organization more and more, so we're looking for members that do have, I'm not going to say a specific number of years, but and you don't have to have had management experience, but generally several years of experience in your field, so senior JavaScript engineers, product managers, people that could come in maybe at a director level as a kind of UX owners and whatnot. And so we will kind of keep other candidates on our pipeline as well, but particularly those skills within full stack JavaScript, I'll be very interested to talk to you. Thank you.
I guess from my side, what I'd recommend is realizing that, especially in startups, the positions they might have on their website are often fuzzy, and even if you don't match exactly, it's still worth applying. And this even depends on, again, your cultural background and how comfortable you feel applying based on the description there. So like the 6 out of 10 comment from earlier, other things that we did, especially at Amazon, were things like remove the word senior from a title, and then we'd get more women applying, and they'd still get hired for that position. So people underestimate themselves sometimes, and especially at startups, we're looking for other skills as well, so feel free to apply. And then also when you get rejections, like we heard earlier at Mercari, sometimes we don't reject people for good reasons, or it's not representative of the rest of the organization. So please feel free to reapply. Even if you get clear feedback that you didn't make it, maybe in 6 months you could reapply. Those things are all interesting. Or you could even ask if you could do something like an internship instead. I think we've never put a position out for an internship, but maybe we'd be open to that if we weren't sure about someone for some reason. But I think that's it, and I'll be around afterwards if people want to.
Definitely echo that. Startup job descriptions evolve faster than what's actually written on the website for what they're looking for, given how fast startups move.
Yeah, so even at like big tech Mercari, I have, I don't know, half a dozen jobs that are like not on the website yet. So even at that size, definitely the internal sort of job market changes faster than anything on the outside shows. Unfortunately, Mercari is still young enough where even though we're a big tech, the job descriptions are still kind of fuzzy and not always well defined. And a lot of times the Japanese is just overwhelming. We have Japanese and English on some of them, and some of the translations aren't so great, and I'm aware. But fundamentally, it's not a bad place to work. The interview process could always use polish. So if you apply, please feel free to let the recruiters know if you feel one way or the other about it. It's a great piece of feedback. But in general, I think anything is worth shooting for. Mercari is a big company. There are many, I don't know, something like 250 teams on it of varying sizes, and so there's a place for as many people as I think are in this room. Yeah. Good luck, I guess. I don't know. Is anyone interested in applying to Mercari? No? Cool. I saw like 10. Okay.
So I want to first congratulate you all for coming out. I think just from what the panel has said, a lot of times the last ditch effort for a company is to put a job online. Because it's expensive posting on Wantedly, posting on Indeed, on all these places. Getting a recruiter. Recruiters take like a 30% cut here at least. Yeah, 30% of someone's first year salary. So companies, especially startups, are going to try to fill their positions from their networks, from events like this, from just meeting people who are interested before they will put it online. So going to events like this, making sure that you're meeting people, not just coming and then leaving at the end of a talk, but exchanging business cards, keeping in contact, that's so important. And it doesn't necessarily have to be someone on this panel. It could just be maybe asking someone that you met, hey, do you know anyone that's hiring? You'd be surprised how many people have leads. So thank you all for coming out. I hope that you all had a good time. Please, before you leave, meet some people, come up and meet these three. And me, I'd also be down to meet you. Make sure that you make some contacts, make some friends, keep in touch with people before you leave, because this is a really small community, and it's also a really exciting community. So make yourself a part of it. Invite yourself in, because we'd be happy to have you. So thank you, Justa, again, for hosting this.
So, really quickly, for Networking Wednesday, there are drinks at the back, so grab something. There is tea, there is water, there is normal beer, there is non-alcoholic beer for those who don't drink. So knock yourself out and have a great networking session. And come to talk to me as well if you're interested about Justin. Happy to talk about that.
Yeah, thanks everybody.